Hello, folks, and welcome to Bernette's Bizarre but True Tales. I'm your host, Bernette, and today I'm taking you all the way to Devon, England, where one cold winter morning in 1855, something strange appeared in the snow. Something so unsettling that people still talk about it today. Just imagine opening your front door before sunrise. It is February, the air is bitter enough to sting your lungs, and the whole world outside is white. Your garden, your lane, the rooftops, the hedges, the churchyard beyond the road, all of it is covered in fresh snow. And then I want you to notice the marks. Not boot prints, not paw prints, and not the broad, uneven scuffs of a farm animal wandering loose. These are small, hoof-like impressions, one set in front of another, almost perfectly spaced, a single line, a trail that moves straight across your garden as if whatever made it had no interest in gates or paths or fences or walls. You follow the tracks with your eyes. They reach the wall, but they do not stop. They appear on top of it. They continue on to the other side. Then they climb over a roof. Then they vanish towards the next house and the next lane and the next field. And some people did follow them. At first, it would have been one neighbor calling to another, then a small knot at the villagers stepping carefully through the snow, trying not to spoil the marks. As they traced the strange line from garden to lane, from wall to wall, from one property to the next, some bent down to study the shapes of the prints. Some crossed themselves without quite meaning to. Others tried to laugh it off, but the laughter sounded thin in the cold air. A farmer muttered that no pony could have passed that way. The children were the hardest to keep still. They craned their necks from behind shawls and coat sleeves, wide-eyed and whispering, wanting to see the marks for themselves. One little girl clutched her mother's skirt so tightly the fabric bunched in her fist. A boy tried to count the prints under his breath, lost his place, and began again. Another child reached one mittened hand toward the snow before an adult caught his wrist and drew it back. Even the dogs, so the story might go, did not rush ahead as dogs usually do. They whined, sniffed once at the marks, and then stayed close to human feet. With every yard the villagers followed, the mystery grew larger because the footprints seemed to behave as if gates and fences and walls and roofs meant nothing at all. "Mind where you step," one man warned, holding out an arm as others crowded behind him. "Keep to the edge. If you blur those marks, we may never know where they had." Another man lifted his stick and pointed sharply at the children. "Back from it, all of you. Not a toe nearer." A woman near the gate tightened her shawl around her shoulders and added, "Do not touch the snow. Do you hear me? Not with your boots and not with your hands." A boy tried to edge forward again, rising on his toes to see over the neighbor's arm. "I only want to look," he said, but his mother drew him behind her at once. "You will look from here," she whispered, "and you will say your prayers if you have sense." Another, peering down with his cap pulled low against the curl, said, "That is no dog. Look at the shape of it." From somewhere near the gate, a woman's voice answered, sharper than she intended. "Then what is it, Mr. Carter? Tell us that, if you can." The children fell silent at that. Even their whispering thinned away. One tucked his chin into his scarf. Another stared at the wall as if expecting something to appear on top of it. Then an older villager, following the line of marks with his eyes, said what no one else wanted to say aloud. "Whatever made those did not walk like a beast of this world. So keep together, keep behind the men, and do not let any child wander off alone." Then, as they reached a narrow place beside a hedge and a low stone wall, something happened that no one could easily explain. The prince led right up to the wall, appeared in the snow on top of it, and continued beyond. But for a few moments, the villagers could hear a faint sound from the far side. It was not the crunch of a boot, nor the scatter of a rabbit breaking cover. It was lighter than that, a small hollow tapping, neat and measured, as if two hard points were touching frozen ground, one after the other. Tap, tap, pause, tap, pause. The sound seemed to move away along the lane, but slowly, almost politely, never hurrying, never stumbling, never slipping on the ice. No breath accompanied it, no snort, no scrape or fear against hedge, no creak of leather or wood. Only that delicate, deliberate knocking, too regular to be wind, and too strange to be easily called animal. When two men climbed the wall to look, the lane beyond was empty. The snow lay smooth except for the same strange marks continuing onward in a single line, already darkening at the edge in the weak morning light. No figure, no animal, no shadow moving away, only the trail and a silence that felt almost purposeful. Now that is the story people in Devon woke up to in February of 1855. By the end of that morning, the same strange marks were being reported across villages, towns, gardens, rooftops, churchyards, and fields. Some accounts claimed they stretched for 40 miles. Others said 100 miles. And almost immediately, people gave them a name that made the whole mystery impossible to forget: the Devil's Footprints. Before I go any further, I want to hold on to that image for a moment, because this is the kind of story that loses its power if I rush in. A strange mark in the snow is not frightening by itself. A footprint is usually comforting. It tells us something ordinary happened here. A person passed by, a dog crossed the road, a bird hopped along a wall. Footprints are evidence of life moving through a place. But these marks were different because they seemed to remove the ordinary explanation at the exact moment they offered evidence. They said very clearly something came through here, and then they refused to say what. That contradiction is what makes the Devil's Footprints so hard to shake. If there had been no marks at all, there would be no story. If there had been an obvious animal trail, there would be no mystery. But a trail that looks deliberate, repeated, and widespread, while also seemingly to ignore ordinary obstacles, sits in the mind like a splinter. I can explain parts of it, I can doubt parts of it, but I cannot quite make the whole thing behave. I'm going to tell this story as if I was there, I was present, because that is how I think folklore works best. Not as a distant list of facts, but as a walk through a place, a time, and a fear I want to stand in that snow with you. I want to ask what I would have believed if I had opened my own door and seen those marks moving straight across my world. This is not just a story about strange footprints. It is a story about weather, newspapers, religion, imagination, panic, local gossip, and the way a community tries to explain something that appears overnight and refuses to fit neatly into reason. Tonight I'm following that trail from the snowy morning of the 9th of February, 1855. Through the villages and towns where the prints were reported, into the theories that tried to explain them. Badgers or birds or donkeys escaped kangaroos, weather effects, hoaxes, and even experimental balloons. And at the end, I'm going to ask the question that keeps this legend alive. If the explanation is ordinary, why does the story feel so uncanny? I am also going to treat this story carefully. Some details come from contemporary reports, some from later retellings, and some from folklore that has been polished by more than a century and a half of repetition. So when I say it was reported or people claimed, I want that distinction to matter. A legend can contain truth without every detail being literally true. And sometimes the most revealing part of a legend is not whether it happened exactly as told, but why people needed to tell it that way. The night before the footprints appeared, South Devon was deep in winter. Snow had fallen heavily, the kind of snow that changes the sound of a place. Roads become quiet, fields lose their edges. Familiar lanes become pale corridors. Even the ordinary things, a cart, a hedge, a church gate, seem slightly unreal under a clean covering of white. When people woke the next morning, they found what looked like a trail of small hoof marks. Contemporary descriptions vary, which matters. Some people describe the marks as cloven, like a split hoof. Others said they resembled the shoe of a small donkey. Many accounts gave them as roughly 4 inches long and around 3 inches wide, set several inches apart in a straight single file line. But the shape alone was not the frightening part. The frightening part was the path. The tracks were said to continue over walls, rooftops, haystacks, and narrow spaces. In some reports, they seemed to pass through or over obstacles that should have broken any ordinary trail. The marks appeared in more than one place across a wide area and other communities in East and South Devon. But I keep coming back to the image of ordinary people stepping outside and becoming investigators before breakfast. Farmers, clergy, tradespeople, children, neighbors, all of them looking down at the snow and then looking up at one another with the same question: who walked here? And because this was Victorian England, the answer did not stay private for long. The story moved from doorstep to conversations, from conversations to local papers, and from local papers into national attention. Once the press took hold of it, the footprints became more than marks in the snow. They became a public mystery. I imagine those first conversations happening in fragments. Have you seen the snow? There are marks by the gate. They go over the wall. They are at the church too. Well, in a small community, information does not travel in straight lines. It moves through errands, bells, market talk, gossip at thresholds, and the men and women stopping each other in the road. By mid-morning, I can picture the mystery becoming communal. It was no longer one household strange discovery. This was something that seemed to belong to everyone. And I think that it is important. A private mystery can be dismissed. A public mystery becomes harder to ignore. If one person says they saw impossible tracks, I might think they misread the snow. If 10 households say something similar, I start to pay attention. If the next village says the same thing, I begin to feel the ground shifting under the ordinary rules of the world. This is the point where fear stops being an individual reaction and becomes weather of its own. It settles over a place. It changes the way people interact, sounds at night, the way they look at a hedge, or the way they close a gate. The snow may have fallen from the sky, but the unease rose from the ground. The name Devil's Footprints tells us almost as much about the people who saw the marks as it does about the marks themselves. In folklore, the cloven hoof carries a heavy symbolic charge. It belongs to goats, sheep, pigs, ordinary animals, yes, but it also belongs to centuries of imagery in which evil is given horns, hooves, and a body that is both animal and supernatural. So when people saw hoof-like prints where no hoofed animals should have gone, the leap was waiting for them. It was not necessarily that everyone literally believed Satan had marched across Devon. Some probably joked. Some probably exaggerated. Some probably used the name because it was the most dramatic label available. But labels have power. Call something the Devil's Footprints, and suddenly every garden path becomes a stage for dread. I imagine the sermons. I imagine the nervous laughter in public houses. I imagine parents telling children not to wander too far from the fire. I imagine someone insisting it was nonsense, then going quiet when the neighbor says the track caused their roof as well. That is one of the reasons this case still works as a podcast story. It sits right on the line between documentation and imagination. There are real reports. There were real people looking at real marks in the snow. But the moment the story traveled, it became unstable. Details expanded, distances stretched, obstacles became more impossible. The trail became less like evidence and more like a legend drawing itself across the map. In the 19th century, the devil was not merely a cartoon figure with horns and a tail. For many people, the devil was part of a living religious imagination. He was temptation, punishment, warning, and presence. Even people who considered themselves sensible could still live inside a culture where supernatural language was close at hand. So, when the prints resembled hooves, and when they appeared where hooves should not be, the symbolic connection was immediate. Now, what I find especially interesting is that the name did two things at once. It made the mystery more frightening, but it also made it easier to talk about. The Devil's Footprints is a phrase people can repeat. It gives shape to confusion. It turns scattered reports into a single story. And once a phrase like that exists, it becomes almost impossible to separate the event from the name. The name becomes part of the evidence, even though it is really part of the interpretation. If I were walking there geographically, I would begin near the estuary. That stretch of Devon gives the mystery its shape. Reports clustered around communities such as Exmouth and Topsham, then across towards Dawlish. Some later accounts pushed the sightings further, even beyond Devon, but the heart of the legend is this snowy landscape of villages, water, rooftops, gardens, and lands. The prints were said to run a single file, which is one of the strangest elements. Most four-legged animals do not leave a neat line like that unless their prints overlap or unless conditions distort what we later see. But to a witness standing in snow, the impression would be immediate. Something had moved with uncanny precision. And then there were the obstacles. This is where the mystery becomes theatrical. The tracks supposedly went over walls, across roofs, through tight spaces, and over haystacks. In some retellings, they crossed water. I have to be careful here, though, because this is where folklore loves to decorate itself. But even if only a fraction of those reports were accurate, I can understand why people were shaken. A trail that refuses to behave like a trail feels like a message. I picture a line of neighbors walking with sticks in their hands, following the marks from one property to another. Someone bends down and measures. Someone else points towards a wall. A child is told to stay back. Dogs hesitate. Rumors move faster than footsteps. If I map the story in my head, I do not see one neat line. I see clusters. A garden here, a lane there, a churchyard, a roof, a field near water, a farmyard with animals moving before dawn, a village where everyone hears that the neighboring village has seen the same thing. Later, when the accounts are gathered together, the mind connects them. It draws a line between dots, but the line may be partly ours. This matters because the reported distance is one of the most dramatic claims in the case. 40 miles is already extraordinary. 100 miles sound almost mythic, but distance in a story like this is not always measured by one person walking a trail from start to finish. It can be estimated by combining sightings across a region. That does not make the reports worthless, but it does mean I have to ask whether the trail was a continuous physical line or whether it became continuous only after people began connecting separate events. Whenever a mystery becomes public, explanations gather around it like crows. The devil's footprints attracted plenty. Some people blamed animals, badgers, rats, otters, birds, donkeys, or ponies. One famous suggestion involved an escaped kangaroo, supposedly from a private collection. Another later theory imagined a balloon dragging shackles across the snow. Others pointed to weather, thawing, refreezing, drifting snow, and the way ordinary tracks can change shape overnight. The badger theory has a certain appeal. Badgers are low, persistent, and capable of moving over rough ground. But would badgers account for rooftop marks, straight lines, and a trail reported across such a large area? Only if we accept that many different tracks were later folded into one story. The bird theory is interesting too. Some birds leave paired or hopping tracks that under the right snow conditions could look odd. Wing marks might appear beside them, but again, that explains some marks better than others. The weather theory may be the least dramatic and the most important. Snow is not a perfect recording surface. It melts,
it settles, it refreezes. A cat's paw print can widen. A cluster of small marks can blur into a single hoof-like shape. Edges can harden. A line of ordinary movement can look deliberate after the snow has transformed it. But here is the problem with that. No single explanation comfortably covers every reported detail. And that may be because the reported details do not all belong to one event. The most satisfying explanation may not be the most exciting one. It may be a mixture. Some tracks made by animals, some reshaped by weather, some misunderstood, some exaggerated, perhaps a few made by people after the story had already started moving. A single cause would be elegant, but history is not always elegant. Folklore almost never is. Still, I understand the temptation to keep looking for one answer, one animal, one hoaxer, one meteorological trick, one escaped creature, one secret experiment. A single answer gives closure. It lets me shut the door, turn the key, and say, there, that is what happened. But the devil's footprints resist that kind of ending. Every theory seems to explain a portion of the trail while leaving another portion untouched. And the more I look at the devil's footprints, the more I suspect the mystery may be composite. By that, I mean there may not have been one creature, one trail, or one cause. There may have been many ordinary tracks across many places, all altered by the same snow conditions, then joined together by rumor, fear, and newspapers into a single impossible journey. That does not make the story less fascinating. To me, it makes it more human. Imagine waking to a strange marks on your own garden. Then imagine hearing that similar marks appeared in the next village. Then the next. Then across the river. Each new report makes your own experience feel bigger. The line in your snow becomes part of a line across the country. The press naturally wanted a story. A mysterious animal is interesting. The devil crossing Devon is unforgettable. Once that frame exists, every ambiguous mark is invited to join the legend. I think human beings are pattern-making creatures because we have to be. Patterns help us survive. But sometimes the pattern we find is not the one nature made. Sometimes it is the one fear makes for us. I also think there is a lesson here about how evidence changes when it passes from hand to hand. A footprint in snow is temporary. It melts or collapses and disappears. A description of a footprint lasts longer, but it is already an interpretation. A newspaper report lasts longer still, but it may simplify, dramatize, or combine the accounts. By the time a mystery becomes famous, the original snow is gone, and we are studying footprints made of language. That phrase stays with me, footprints made of language, because every retelling leaves its own mark. One writer emphasizes the rooftops, another emphasizes the distance, another brings in the devil, another tries to rescue the case with science. Each retelling walks across the snow again, and each one changes the surface slightly. If I put myself in Devon in 1855, I cannot pretend I would have been perfectly rational. I might want to be the person who laughs it off, who says, it was only animals and snow. But I know myself well enough to admit this. If I saw a line of hoof-like prints crossing a roof, I would feel something cold move through me. There is a difference between explanation and experience. Explanation comes later. Experience arrives first. First, there is the mark in the snow. First, there is the silence. First, there is the neighbor saying, "It came through here too." That is why legends endure. They preserve the feeling of the moment before the explanation arrives. The devil's footprints preserve that moment beautifully. They keep us standing at the door in the morning cold, looking at something that should not be there. When I think about living inside the legend, I think about nightfall after the discovery. The day has been full of toil, measurements, arguments, and speculation, but eventually the light goes. The same gardens that were busy with neighbors becoming quiet again. The same roofs are dark. The same lanes are empty. And if you are one of the people who saw those prints, you have to go to sleep knowing that whatever made them came while everyone else was sleeping. That is a different kind of fear. It is not the fear of seeing a monster. It is the fear of missing it, the fear of waking after the fact, the fear that something passed so close enough to leave a trace, but not close enough to be understood. In some ways, that is worse, because imagination has no witness to correct it. At this point in the story, I want to slow down, because it is easy to chase explanations and forget the emotional center of the case. This was not a puzzle found in a laboratory. It was a disturbance in ordinary life. A baker, a farmer, a vicar, a child, a neighbor, each person encountered the mystery in their own familiar place, their garden and their lane, their churchyard, their roof. That matters because fear is always stronger when it enters somewhere private. If something strange happens far away, I can call it interesting. If it crosses my doorstep, I call that a warning. The devil's footprints cross boundaries, physical boundaries like walls and roofs, but also emotional ones. They cross from public space into private space, from natural history into folklore, from evidence into this story. Let me walk through the major explanations one by one, because each reveals something different about the mystery. First, the animals. This is the most obvious category. Devon had animals everywhere. Domestic animals, wild animals, birds, rodents, badgers, foxes, cats. A number of these could have left tracks that became distorted by melting and refreezing snow. The difficulty is scale. One animal does not comfortably explain reports for such a wide area. Many animals, however, could. Second, the weather. This may be the quiet engine of the whole legend. Snowfall, thaw, rain, freezing temperatures, and wind can transform the appearances of tracks. What begins as a paw, claw, or bird mark can become a hoof-like impression. If similar weather affected a wide region, similar distortions could appear in many places at once. Third, mischief. Hoaxes are always possible. A prankster with a tool could create strange marks, especially in one village. But the wider the reported areas become, the harder a single hoax is to maintain. Again, a composite explanation works better. Some real tracks, some exaggerated reports, perhaps some deliberate additions. Fourth, the exotic escapees. The escaped kangaroo theory is memorable because it sounds just plausible enough to be repeated and just strange enough to be entertaining. Victorian private mandarins did exist. Exotic animals did sometimes escape, but a kangaroo does not solve every detail, and the theory feels more like an attempt to match the weirdness of the story than to explain it fully. Fifth, the machineries or balloons. Later Kant suggested an experimental balloon dragging objects across the snow. This theory has drama, but it also has problems. It depends on a specific chain of events and does not neatly account for all the described locations and behaviors. Still, I understand why people reach for it. If the tracks moved over obstacles, maybe the maker was not walking at all. And then there is the supernatural explanation, the one that I named the case. I do not need to endorse it to understand its power. The supernatural explanation is not just an answer, it is a feeling. It says the world has opened and something from outside has stepped through. If I am adapting this into a more dramatic audio sequence, this is where I would let every theory have its own sound. Animals, a rustle in a hedge, claws on frozen earth, wings beaten once in the dark, weather dripping thawed water, then the sudden glassy silence of refreeze, human mischief, a muffled laugh, a tool pressed into the snow, footsteps retreating, the kangaroo, almost absurd, almost comic, and yet strange enough to linger. The balloon, rope dragging, metal clinking, something unseen moving overhead, and then, beneath all of them, the oldest son in the story, a single footstep where no foot should be. For me, the weather explanation is the one I return to most often, but because it solves everything cleanly, but because it explains how many different ordinary tracks could begin to resemble one another. Snow is a storyteller. It edits, it exaggerates, it removes detail and leaves outline. A paw can become a hoof. A cluster can become a single mark. A wandering path can seem straighter once drifting snow fills in the parts that do not fit the pattern. The devil's footprints are not only a mystery of tracks, they are a mystery of interpretation. What do we do when evidence is incomplete? What do we do when witness accounts conflict? What do we do when a strange event appears in a culture already rich with religious imagery and supernatural expectations? Well, we tell a story. That is what we do. We gather fragments and arrange them into something with shape. Sometimes that shape is scientific. Sometimes it is folkloric. Sometimes it is both at once. I think the devil's footprints survive because they are visually simple. A line of marks in snow. That is all. No monster sighting, no corpse, no lost treasure, just impressions, absence made visible. Something was there, and now it is gone. That simplicity makes the image portable. You can carry it in your mind. You can retell it in one sentence. One winter morning in Devon, hoofprints appeared in the snow and went over roofs and walls for miles. That is the kind of sentence folklore loves. It opens a door and leaves it open. There is also something deeply British about the way this legend sits between the practical and the uncanny. On one hand, people measure the prints. They compare them to animals. They write letters. They draw diagrams. On the other hand, the name of the devil is never far away. The rationale and the supernatural are not neatly separate. They walk side by side through the snow. And maybe that is why I like the case. It does not ask me to choose entirely between belief and skepticism. It lets me stand in the uncomfortable middle. I can doubt the devil and still feel the chill. I can believe in weather and animals and still understand why a village might whisper. I can say there is probably an ordinary explanation, while also admitting that ordinary explanations do not always erase extraordinary feelings. So, where do I land? I do not think the devil walked across Devon in 1855. I think snowfall, animals moved, weather altered tracks, people talked, newspapers amplified, and a sketched set of strange observations became one of Britain's most enduring winter mysteries. So I also think that saying it was only the weather and animals misses something essential, because the story is not only about what makes the prince, it is about what the prince made in people, which is fear, wonder, speculation, and memory. The marks melted, the snow disappeared, the villagers returned to ordinary life, but the line remained, not on the ground, but in the imagination. And maybe that is the real footprint of the devil's footprints, not a hoof mark in snow, but a trail of unease that still leads us back to a cold February morning, to a front door opening, to a person looking down and whispering, "What walked here?" If you enjoyed this episode, follow the show for more strange histories, folklore, and the unsolved stories from Britain and beyond. And if you have ever heard a local legend that deserves an episode of its own, send it on in. I may follow that trail next. And if this tale gave you a chill, do not let the trail end here. Follow Bernette's Bizarre but True Tales wherever you listen. Leave a rating or review if you can, and share this episode with someone who loves folklore, mysteries, and strange little pieces of history that refuse to stay buried. And if you have a bizarre but true story from your town, your family, or your own local history, send it in too. Your mystery might be the next trail I follow. So that's it for tonight, folks, and I'll see you in the next story.